Okay. All right. So again, welcome everyone. And today we have a wonderful speaker who is a assistant professor at Rutgers. I will first introduce her before her presentation. So Dr. Victoria Abraya is an assistant professor at cell biology and neuroscience at Rutgers University. With expertise in mouse molecular genetics, Dr. Abraya's pioneering research endeavors are dedicated to unraveling the complexities of the somatosensory systems. Her work examines the underlying mechanism of touch, pain, and proprioception, focusing on the intricate spinal cord circuits that govern these fundamental sensory experiences. Dr. Abraria's academic journey is marked by a robust foundation in system neuroscience. During her PhD with Lisa Goodrich at Harvard Medical School, she contributed significantly to our understanding of the molecules and circuits of the inner ear, leading to groundbreaking insights into fundamental principles of how we hear and balance. Her postdoctoral work with Dr. David Ginty, also at Harvard Medical School, further solidified her training as a system neuroscientist, exploring innovative approaches to understanding somatosensory processing at the neural circuit level. At Rutgers University, Dr. Abraya leads a dynamic research team dedicated to advancing our knowledge of how somatosensory information is encoded and processed by the nervous system and its alteration due to injury and disease. Her contributions to the field have been acknowledged with numerous awards and grants, such as those from the Pew Charitable Trust, Rita Allen Foundation, Craig H. Nelson Foundation, and her recognition as a Kavli Fellow of the National Academies of Science. Her dedication to scientific inquiry is paralleled by her commitment to mentorship, under which she has guided the next generation of neuroscientists. Notably, several of her undergraduate students have been supported through the NINDS diversity supplements. Her pre- and postdoctoral researchers have secured F grants through NINDS, and her first postdoc has recently been awarded a K99. Dr. Abraya's research has been extensively published in top-tier scientific journals such as Cell and Neuron. Moreover, her work has captured the attention of the broader public, featuring in media outlets like Scientific American, the BBS Radio Hour, and PBS, cementing her studies as a lead voice in the neuroscience community. Thank you so much, Victoria, for joining us today, and we are so excited to hear about your work. But if it's possible, before getting started, I would like to also briefly mention about iNet. So I will take over the share.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, no worries at all. Okay, so as you might know, you might hear about us. We are iNet, and stands for International Networking in New York City. And we are providing support and offer professional development and help community building and networking. And we are basically STEM international scientists in the New York City area, but not restricted to New York City. For example, myself as a postdoc at Rutgers University. So we are trying to capture all tri-state area and all around the institute and all of the international scientists. We are having career development events, for example, just like today's event, and also networking event and social event, happy hours and after hangouts together in the city. And we have also having an event about exploring the opportunities in research inside and outside the United States. And also we are having info session about some spatial topics. We have currently around, this is not probably updated, we have 1,200 members to our iNet. And our board members, scientists all around the institutes, and we are actively looking for members to join us, our vibrant community, to help with the postdocs and the international scientists. If you are interested, just reach out to us, and probably you are seeing text on our chat right now. Our admin manager, Gabi, typing all of this. If you're interested, join us, and we can work together. And again, you can follow us on our social media. We are active on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We are also sharing our upcoming events. So to be able to stay tuned for our upcoming event and receive our monthly newsletter, you should just go ahead and then be a member, and then you'll receive our monthly newsletter. Lastly, I would like to thank our co-founders. Now, currently, we are 10 years old, and it's thanks to all our previous members who made it possible, and then we are keep rolling as INET and working for our international community. With that, now I will hand off the floor our amazing speaker, and Victoria, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. And I know that today I'm here to tell you guys about, launching your lab and what are some of the things that I've learned as I've sort of launched my own lab. And I have to say, I've only been here for 6 years. And I think one of the things, the first comment that I have to say is, having folks like Ertuğrul and other people lead some of those things, and you guys attending here today is really literally the first step in understanding to launch your lab. So being involved in some of these activities that you guys are doing, connecting with folks and networking is really one of the ways in which I've learned to all the tips and tricks that I'm going to tell you today. So continue to come to these things. Ertuğrul, continue to do the amazing work that you do because it's really important for the community. So I'll tell you a little story of how I ended up today. And I just put in my tenure package. It was unanimously voted by the department. So it's going through the promotions committee. If all goes well, hopefully, in April, I'd be tenured. And so I'll tell you kind of in this retrospective, when I was putting this, lecture together, what was it really that made the difference, right? And what I'm going to tell you is really what I believe made the difference for me to get me to like my postdoc to now being almost tenured, hopefully tenured. So you don't need to know who I am because Ertuğrul did a lovely introduction, but I called myself the lead motivator. So when you're a PI, you're no longer a scientist, you are a motivator. And this will play into a little bit later into why this makes a big difference. Who am I the lead motivator of? All of these lovely folks that you see here. And actually, this is probably an old slide. So I have postdocs, I have graduate students, I have data scientists, I have animal care teams because we do preclinical animal research. And we have a lot of undergraduates. Our lab studies the sense of touch. And so this is a picture of a hair follicle in which we use mouse genetics to label the different kinds of sensory neurons that innervate hairy skin. And we're interested in understanding how those neurons communicate to the brain, the spinal cord. This is sort of a summary of our collaborators or summary of our grants. And I'm not listing here all of the grants that people in the lab have gotten. So Mark has gotten a K99, Mano has gotten a Safari Transition Award, Jack and Arlene F32s. It is really important in launching your lab to make sure that in recruiting people, you also help them to get their own funding. And in our studies, so a lot of the people featured there in this slide are featured in some of the studies that have been coming out of the lab, looking at sensory control of movement, pain, as well as affective touch and sexual receptivity. So how do you get from this position that I was in, starting a faculty position, to this, right? I'm a professor with tenure, and it really depends on where you're at. And this step here can take anywhere between 5 to 10 years. And whether you're at an undergraduate institution like I am, or at a medical school, this clock can swing either from 5 years to 10 years. So in my undergraduate institution is 5 to 7 years is the tenure clock. In medical schools, it could be anywhere between 7 to 10 years. And what you're expected to do at the time is to get grants, papers, mentor, teach, do service, and you're only given a startup amount of money to do this. So the idea is that you take that startup and you invest in people, and then those people will get you more grants, more papers, and also in between that, all that stuff, you teach and you maybe do a little bit of service. So, what are the steps to getting you from point A to point B? And I kind of like put this into kind of 5 different steps, right? So you have to lay the foundation, right? Which is setting up your lab. And that comes in different ways that you can do this. I think you have to then cultivate excellence, right? You have to build a team where excellence is the goal, right? Not the neuron paper, not the R01. Excellence. Excellence is the goal, right? Then you have to fuel the research. You have to take your startup funds and then make more money out of that, right? Get your R01 grant, your NSF grant, right? Whatever grants you think is going to lead to, a strong research program, but also, let's be honest, to get you to tenure, right? Get you to promotion. Then you have to, steer the ship, right? As a motivator. You have to manage all your research projects. And then I think you have to also reserve a little bit of time to expanding your horizons, right? Meaning that it's not just about the ideas that you have right now, the team that you have, but also reserving some time to think about, networks and collaborations, right? So laying the foundation, setting up your lab is really about space and gear, right? Really crafting your lab's backbone, prioritizing space and equipment for a functional lab. So a lot of you will, and again, I'm talking about you've landed your job. How do you then start your lab? And I think a functional lab space optimizes, layout for workflow and collaboration. Think really critically about what lab space versus workspace, not just where your people are going to be doing the research, but where your people are going to be having coffee, having conversations. Where are they going to be eating their lunch, right? So it's really important as you look for lab space that you look for where are my people going to sit and have coffee. Prioritize acquiring essential equipment that offers the most versatility and is critical for your initial experiments. I think I made a lot of mistakes, getting equipment because you get all this money and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I want to buy all this stuff. And then getting equipment that then I recruited postdocs and my postdocs were like, I don't want to use that. And then they had to buy, either we had to get rid of the equipment or we gave it to another lab or whatever. So you really, I think, have to just get equipment as needed as you're recruiting people into your lab. Don't pretend that you'll know what your graduate student might want to use or what your postdoc might want to use, right? Just because you've used it, right? So think about the next experiment. Don't think about, 10 years from now. I did that and I wasted a lot of money, right? Hopefully we'll use that piece of equipment at some point, but I don't know if we will. Yeah, of course you have to consider future needs, but really focus on what's necessary to begin your research right now. And that's really just who you recruit into your lab. And I think that efficient space and equipment management significantly impact lab productivity and also safety. So ask the people in your lab, as you're recruiting people and you're setting things up, where to place things, where do they like to see things? Okay. I think that a lot of anxiety that leads into setting up a new lab is navigating budgets. So we are given lots of money. Some startups can be small, some startups can be really big. Regardless of the money, none of us probably have any financial backbone to really manage that money. But here's all you need to know. This is the breakdown, right? And I didn't take this from my lab. I literally Googled, if you run a corporation, where does your money go? And if you notice, the majority of your money goes to staff, right? So these are your postdocs, right? Then it goes to, it's like if I'm running a bagel shop, like where does my money go, right? Staff, rent, insurance, equipment, marketing, other. So I'll give you the translation of what that means to a lab. Staff is your postdoc, graduate student, your lab manager. Rent might be, for example, the animals that you use, maybe if you do animal work. Like insurance and things is like fringe benefits, right? So your people, whatever you pay your people, you also have to pay anywhere between 30, 40, up to 80% of fringe benefits. So that is money that it goes to pay for benefits of your people. And of course, equipment, very minimal. Marketing other could be, I don't know, your lunches with people, whatever, right? Like lab food, right? But that's the breakdown of your budget. Predominantly staff, and probably if you're doing animal work, a lot of animal work. But equipment is actually very small. And actually, fringe benefits are a substantial amount that you need to consider. Anywhere between 30 at Rutgers is 80%, right? So this is the rough budget, and this is all that you need to know to launch your lab. That's it. So obviously understanding funding limitations and allocating resources wisely to avoid overspendings, right? So obviously you don't want to buy a huge piece of equipment and not have a postdoc to use it. Right? You have to first have the people and then buy the equipment that's needed for them to do the first experiment. And after they do the first experiment, then you can consider buying the next. So, try to avoid overspending, but don't stress. I began by counting every penny and I was driving myself insane. Also know that you yourself are not running a bagel shop. And it is important to note that at some points you are going to overspend on some categories, and that's okay. That's why we have people in finance, right? In universities that take care of us. It's really hard to reach net zero, right? And I would say always shoot for a little bit of overspending, 10%, right? Because then you're really maximizing your money. And I think that you have to, what does it mean to review and adjust your budgets? What that means is that when you get your lab, schedule a meeting with finance, right? And sit with them once a quarter, once a semester, at least once a year to just go over numbers, right? It doesn't have to take a lot of time. Like once a year, meet with finance and you say, this is my startup. This is how I'm thinking about spending it. And actually, the people in finance have they have great ideas, right? Just listen to them, right? Work with your business office. And when you do this, when you're giving a startup and you make regular meetings with people in finance, then that ensures that you have sustainability and growth. For example, you just recruited a postdoc and you're thinking, oh God, there's this amazing postdoc that I'm trying to recruit. Go call finance and say, hey, do I have money? How much money? How much is the fringe? And then they'll let you know. They'll be like, yeah, you have money for this postdoc for a year. Great. You have money for a postdoc for 2 years. If they tell you, oh, you only have money for a postdoc for 3 months, that's not going to work, right? So I think you have to just be in constant communication. But again, you're not running a bagel shop in the sense that you're going to overdraft sometimes on accounts, and that's okay, right? The point is to not overdraft. I would say more than 20%, right? Because that's a lot. Okay, so that's all you need to know about budgeting. And of course, there's lots of, I try also to highlight different books and things that you guys can, At the Helm is, one textbook that some people like, some people don't, but it's a book that I read in the beginning and it gave me also a little bit of tips and tricks on some of these things. I mean, At the Helm's a little bit outdated, but there's other books also available. I think the most important thing is building your team, right? So once you set up, you lay the foundation where you developed a relationship with your finance people. Now it's time to really cultivate excellence in your team. So what's the quest for talent is really recruiting your dream team, right? So this is the picture that I always like to use, the Lakers dream team. Sorry, I grew up in LA, right? And so this is like, yeah, it's like, this is the dream team. I mean, it's like, it's like amazing, right? And so those are the people that I think about when I interview postdocs and I'm thinking about what is my dream team. It's not about, of course, you have to recruit the right team members, right? And actually, this is possibly the most important thing that you can do in launching your lab, right? Recruiting the right people. And it doesn't always mean the people with the right expertise. Most often than not, it means the people with the right personality, right? Because when you're a starting lab, there are sometimes things need to happen fast. Sometimes you need to shift. There's a lot of different moving parts. You're yourself, learning how to mentor, right? And you have to think who you are as a person and who you think you can mentor, what kind of personalities you can mentor. Recruit those personalities, because a person that's going to gel with you as a person, you can teach them anything, right? But a person where you can't gel personality wise, right, I think is going to be difficult. So look not just at techniques, also look at personality. Is this someone that I think that I would be able to mentor and someone that I could work with? But I have to tell you, when you launch your lab, you're no longer a scientist, you are a recruiter, right? You're recruiting people. That's your job. And I think us it's, look for individuals who not only possess the required technical skill, but also share your lab's vision and work ethic, right? What kind of, work is necessary to accomplish the things that you have to say. And by work ethic, I don't mean, only recruit people that are going to work 60 hours a week. No, 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 no. That's not what I'm trying to say. The work ethic, someone that holds the same dreams as passion for the work, right? How do people think about the work? And different people have different. Some people think of work as a means to an end, right? Some people think of work as the work itself being rewarding, right? And I have my own, right, vision of what work is. You have to jive. That has to match in some way, shape, or form. So, and I think when it comes to recruitment, you have to use a variety of recruitment strategy. You have to go network at meetings, advertise in academic journals, so that people don't do that anymore. Social media is obviously really big, and I need to tell you guys that. But oftentimes, I think where I got my first two postdocs, Mark and Minot, were of labs that I knew, and I literally reached out to them. They didn't reach out to me. I went after them, right? And I had to really sell my lab, right, as to why this would be a great place for them to be here. So after you've recruited one or two people, maybe it's a postdoc, maybe it's a grad student, right? Maybe it's a couple postdocs. Now that you've cultivated that team, you have to lead with vision, right? So fostering growth and harmony is really essential, right? In really cultivating the culture of mentoring, right? And so I think it's really important that you create a lab mission statement. I have one, happy to share it with everybody. I think it's actually put it on our website. And on our website, we have what our values are, right? And I think that those are things have to be apparent. I think it's really important that now that you recruit your team and you feel that vision, all of a sudden you have to build the right environment for them to communicate with one another, for them to collaborate with one another, for them to respect each other, right? And I think a lab mission statement does a lot of those things, but every time you meet with them one-on-one, you have to embody that as much as you can. And trust me when I say that sometimes I'm not my best self in front of everybody, right? And sometimes, things get really hectic, but also realizing that you're human and communicating that also goes a long way. Be a mentor who is accessible, right, and provides constructive feedback, and be the mentor that is solely focused on career development. This is how I did it, right? I'm very people-centered. I take a person, I say, what do you need to succeed? Because what they need to succeed is what I need to succeed in my own career, which is papers and grants, right? Like there's right? But it's like, what is it that you want to study? What drives you? What gets you out of bed every morning? And that's That's done with regular one-on-one meetings, lab meetings. So when I left my lab, my graduate advisor, David Ginty, who's HHMI, National Academy members, every single accolade in the world, I said, what is one piece of advice that you give me as I launched my own lab? And he goes, meet with people regularly, once a week, once every 2 weeks, and never miss them. He said, never miss those meetings. No, rain, shine, traveling, not traveling. Like your travel schedule is around your meetings with them, and never miss those meetings, because at those meetings, you're their cheerleader, right? You have to make sure that they not only have the money, but they feel supported. Okay. And I think, establish clear expectations, which goes to your lab mission statement, and celebrate every single achievement, right? Is it a small paper? Is it a small grant? Is it a big grant? Is it a big paper? Every single chance that you get to celebrate it, you celebrate it. We do champagne bottles. You'll see them here in the background, right? Every paper, every grant is just champagne bottle, right? So pick something and you celebrate every little thing, right? Like I remember in my graduate advisor's lab, we celebrated our first data point, because I was also in a young lab as a graduate student, and like we had a pizza party when we finally had the first data that came out of the lab, right? So I think I did that too in the lab. So you just celebrate everything, right? Okay, so I think I think something that causes a lot of anxiety, and I know this because I think about this every day, is the funding and grants, right? So fueling your research. It is a grant maze out there, right? Um, so how do you win the treasure, right? So tips for navigating the world of research funding. And listen, I say the one tip that I have for this is there's a million, grants that you write. And for every 10 grants that I write, nine don't get funded, right? That's just the reality of it. And then of course here I have, say for the NIH, you have things like NIH Reporter, you have, NSF has a similar one in which you can Google things. And I can't tell you how much time I spent on NIH Reporter the first 2 years of my life. Like every day I was on NIH Reporter. Every idea that I had, I typed it in there. Like what was funded, what wasn't funded, which study section, what this on, So there are mechanisms for your grants in which when you submit a grant, there's a body that reviews it, there's a body that funds it. It's like a whole ecosystem, and it's confusing. But with anything that is confusing and is complicated, the only thing that you can do is say, what's the next best step? Like, what can I learn today, right? So I started with NIH Reporter, right? So, I typed in things, it would give me program announcements, it would give me study sections, right? And of course, this is nothing new. You focus, grant applications on agencies and foundations that support the research in your field, right? How do you do that? You talk to people ahead of you, right? So people that just got the grant in that study section in that institute, right? And I can't stress enough this idea of networking, getting people on Zoom, asking them. And I just did this the other day, and it works magically, right? I'm interested in a new funding mechanism, right? Because I have this idea. I went to NIH Reporter, I pulled up that funding mechanism, I saw who got it last. I sent an email to this person. I said, I see that you just got this grant on this, on this research idea, which is kind of similar to mine, but different. Would you be willing to sit down with me on Zoom and go over your grant? He's like, yes, absolutely. We're on, we just had a Zoom meeting, right? In which he told me his experience with that grant mechanism, how, when he submitted, didn't get funded the first time, and this is how he revised it. You'd be surprised at how people are willing to help you when you just email them, right? And I'm now on the other end where people email me, and I'm always happy to be like, oh yeah, when I went to that study section, it took me 3 times to get that grant. Let me tell you why, right? So I think people are really, they want to help, right? So, you're just an email away sometimes. And literally, it's just happened like last month, right? A person that I never knew from this university, and never, never knew of this person. And now I have someone that has this funded mechanism that I'm going to try now in the new year, right? So, So I think like reaching out to people is super duper important. So don't be intimidated by this, right? Just, keep on moving forward. I think, the next comment is something that really helped me, but you have to see in diversifying your grant portfolio, think of projects that can span several institutes, several study sections. Some people, dig deep into a project and dig deeper, deeper, deeper. I'm more of the mindset to tend to be more expansive in the way that I think about my work and I think about how I might relate to this or that. Um, I have to tell you that, with funding rates in single digits for institutes, I think diversifying your portfolio is super important in thinking about how, your research, may be related to other things, right? So I think that if you can think of projects over time that can span several study sections and institutes, I think that gives you a great chance at being funded, getting that 1 R01 grant, right? That everybody needs to get tenure. And so, in the beginning, sometimes it might seem daunting, but I think what I did a lot in the beginning in retrospect is I tried different things, right? And some things didn't get funded, some things did, right? And then all of a sudden I worked on that. And I don't think that I would have had the success early on if I didn't try a lot of things in the beginning, right? So that was just sort of what worked for me. Okay. I think there's a lot now in terms of learning about the grant mechanisms. There's tons of podcasts. So if you do a lot of NIH grants, I listen to Building Up the Nerve, which is a podcast, and I listen to All About Grants. And these are podcasts that I turn on in the car that tell me about NIH funding, and they teach you tips and tricks. People are on these podcasts talking about, different funding mechanisms, how to write a good bio sketch, yada yada, right? So I think like that's why has led me to understand the NIH system a lot better. And of course, so I think that, the bottom line is you'll learn as you go along, but what you'll also learn is that, out of 10 grants, only one will get funded, two at most. So you just have to learn how to write and how to submit things faster, right? And not to get married to any one idea and to try and pivot, you have to develop a thick skin, which leads into my next, which is, pen to paper, right? So mastering the art of grant writing, strategies for compelling proposals, right? So everybody is going to tell you different things, but this is kind of in bottom line, what good grant writing does is tells a good story, right? And it's engaging. And sometimes there's a little bit of risk taking. There's no innovation if you don't take risks, right? And so I think, the grant writing, pen to paper basically means that you have to write every day, right? I write every day. I write grants every day. That's what I do. I spent at least, 1 or 2 hours grant writing. A specific games page, an abstract, a methodology section. I spend every morning strategizing. Should I submit this grant now or later, right? So, but bottom line, I think each grant has to be super clear, right? It has to articulate your research question, the methodology, the significance, expected outcomes, right? But it has to have that very sort of clear, simple message. Of course, you have to tailor each application to the funder's priority, highlight your project's novelty and potential impact. These are all things of a good story, right? That you build. The power of narratives in your proposal. I said you are a recruiter, right? You are now a writer. That is what you are now when you're in your own lab. You recruit people and you write. And so if you just get into the mindset of like, I'm a writer, what tips do writers use? They write every day, they block time, right? And it's amazing when you block 2, 3 hours a day every day, what you can accomplish, right? Yeah, that's easy to say, but really, how do I do it? Oh my God, I love this. I love this slide. Okay, so yeah, so that's easy to say, but really, how do I do it? And the answer is practice, right? So yes, you're gonna have to sit there in front of your monitor, and I think for the first 2 months, I would just sit there and it'd be a blank page, right? And then eventually, like I just started writing, right? And I just put myself through the agonizing exercise every day. And it was agonizing, but it was just a short amount of time. And now I sit down in 30 minutes, I can bang out like a paragraph, right? It's just practice, right? So write every day, 2 or 3 hours per day. Hands down, you need to block that time, 2, 3 hours a day. Don't schedule meetings, don't schedule anything. 2, 3 hours a day, you're just writing. That's it. And and trust me when I say if you do that, grant writing will be simple, right? And so that's the simple truth. Okay, so and of course there's like a gazillion books on grant writing, right? Again, I'll have to. There's like literally like so many different ways, and in universities will give you grant writing workshops. I take every grant writing workshop imaginable to man, right? So listen, there are people are always saying getting grants is hard. I get that. But you're never going to get the grant unless you write every day, right? And so that's just the truth of it, right? And so it isn't as hard as people think. You just have to write every day, right? Okay. So say like you recruit the team, you're starting to write grants, right? And you're submitting grants, and submit a lot, as many as you can. Now you have to manage your project, right? So how do you steer the ship? So from plan to action. Say like you have a startup, maybe you got a couple grants here and there. Like, okay, now we're gonna do work. So how do you take that plan to action? So how do you orchestrate your project? So the basics of effective project management and research. And I'm going to give you a very simple route, a Google Doc. So everybody in my lab has a Google Doc that's on there. I don't know if you can read it, right? In which I say, okay, important links or dates, do not erase. And I put important links, like I put their IDP, right? Like, the link to the bio, maybe the link to the T32 that they're working on, right? Program requirements. I think this is a graduate student, it looks like, yeah. So like, okay, program requirements. What's the requirements for the program? What are their grant goals? What are their paper goals? What meetings are they going to attend to? What are their milestones? So I literally have a Google Doc for each person in my lab in which I say, when do they start? What are their aspirations, right? Like, how many papers have they had in the lab, or what's the plan, right? And I literally, before my one-on-one meetings, this is what I look through. And then of course I see on the left, I have like notes from our meetings. And now with ChatGPT, it's even easier, right? With my one-on-one meetings, I was like, do you mind if I just turn on the transcript? And then the transcript is going in the background, capturing our conversation. I don't have to write anything down. And at the end of the day, I throw it through ChatGPT and it gives me notes. It gives me action items. It gives me everything, right? So, and that's literally what I do. I sit there and I listen and I write things down. And I send out emails usually. So, so effective project management involves setting realistic goals, right? Timelines and milestones. How? You have a Google Doc, right? Program requirements, grant requirements, paper requirements, right? If you have a postdoc, you're like, okay, if this postdoc wants to go get a faculty position, right? Getting them on training grants, F grants, K99s. If this postdoc wants to go into industry, okay, so what's your research? What's your paper? How do we transition into industry, right? So think of trainee needs and then organize this Google Doc based on those needs. Use project management tools to track progress and adjust plans as necessary. So I use a simple Google Doc. Some people use Asana, some people use Trello. I like our Google Doc. We have notes, we have milestones, it doesn't have to be super complicated. It just needs to be something that you go to every time when you meet with your people, right? And that they have access to this, right? That's it. And I think through these meetings, I try to foster a collaborative environment where, the person I'm talking to and other team members can contribute ideas and take ownership of their tasks. So how do I do that? I layer team versus individual projects, right? So this person on this Google sheet here is a graduate student. But how does her project interface with a postdoc's projects, right? How can she contribute to a postdoc project? How could a postdoc project contribute to her project, right? So because in order to get to, papers and grants, you just can't have one person working on a project. You have to have multiple people, right? But multiple people can't all work on one project, right? Because people have to have ownership. So you have to have like a fine balance of layering, right? Team versus individual projects, right? And so a helpful tip, in doing this for me is in the time management matrix, right? So how do you prioritize tasks and deadlines, right, for yourself and for your people? And it's really, people always talk about this matrix, and I literally have it here on my wall in 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 saying like what is urgent, not urgent, what's important, what's not important. And I think when you steer the ship, I think it's papers and grants are the most important thing, right? And so making sure, but they're not always, papers are important but not urgent because they don't have a deadline, right? But grants are urgent and important because they have deadlines, right? So how you balance that time. I think if I spent a lot of time in the beginning studying this time management matrix and figuring out, how all these things fit within this square, and you have to, manage a lot of things in terms of research, administrative duties, and personal development. So I use a time block planner, right? Where, like, for example, I'm giving this talk today. Thank you, Icicle. That's my service hour for the week, right? I am not doing any more service this week. That's it, right? This is my service for the week. And, I think I have a 2-hour cap on service every week. So that's it. Like if someone else, and I asked to go, I think this happened where someone else asked me to do something this week and I said, I can't because I'm giving my service hours taken up, right? It'll have to be later, right? So I think having a really strict, when you do service shouldn't be more than 2 hours a week, right? Teaching, depending, right? It could be up to 4 or 5 hours, it could be more, right? And the rest needs to be grants and papers, right? So making sure that for those things in this blue square, right, which are not urgent and not important, you put a time cap on that. I said it cannot do more than 2 hours a week. I'm sorry, right? And so you only know that unless you time block it, right? So yeah, so prioritize tasks based on the impact and deadline. So look at your time management matrix and just be like, well, my time is best used on papers and grants, right? And so if I reach my cap in, teaching, I'm just not going to do any more teaching. Or of course you have to go to lecture, right? But beyond lecture, preparing for lecture, sometimes I may have 20 minutes to prepare for a lecture, right? Because I'm tapped out on my teaching and I just have those 20 minutes, right? And I make the best out of it, right? And I think the most important thing is, when talking about prioritizing is really learning to delegate and trust your team, right? And so allowing you to focus on high priority projects and strategic planning. And I would say, I did this in the beginning and people thought it was crazy, but the proof is in the pudding, right? I got a part-time admin. I used part of my startup to pay for a part-time admin, right? To help me schedule meetings, to help me write letters of rec, is literally a 2-hour a day person, a 4-hour a day person to help me with those things. And because protecting my time was, I was the most valuable resource in my lab for the first 3 years. And how do you protect your time? Well, you can get, of course, the first year you can't do anything, barely, but second year, once you get people and stuff, consider getting a part-time admin, right? To help with some of these things that you're doing, help schedule meetings with people, help schedule Zooms. It takes about 6 emails to schedule one meeting, right? Like that's a lot of time, right? Okay, so I think that gives you like a good sense of like, okay, these are the different things that I have to now consider. The last thing that I'm gonna say, and then I'm done, is this idea of expanding your horizons, okay? So I think in the beginning, a lot of the information that you're gonna get is to focus in your lab. And I think that is super important. Okay, you have to focus on your people, you have to focus in your lab, you have to get your first few papers, you have to have a few grants. But save some time to think beyond the lab, right? So building strategic bridges, right? So the power of networking and establishing valuable connections, right? And I think this is important for tenure, right? Building that professional network that can open doors to new collaborations, new funding opportunities, and maybe, some cutting edge methodologies, right? So why is this important, right? Because all of a sudden in the future, after you get through the first grant or so, if you don't have that network in place, getting that second grant, getting that renewal, getting like the next stage is going to be harder, right? So how do you then get to the high impact publications? How do you get to the larger grants, things like that? Is by those things that you start to foster in the beginning. So don't be afraid, right, to travel, give talks. Keep that in mind, right? Of course, you have to spend the lab, but I would say, yeah, accept talks. Start to build your network, right? And this is completely outdated advice, right? Where we like, you have to have all senior author papers. No. A lot of promotions committee now are looking at collaborative work a lot differently, right? They're looking at collaborative grants a lot differently, with funding situation being tougher, it goes up and down, right? When funding situations are tougher, you're looked at collaborative R1s a lot better, right? So that's outdated advice, right? You need collaborators and you need to also be well respected within your field. And so you need to get out there and network a bit. Maybe not within the first 2 years, but definitely 2 years on, you need to get out there. Of course, attend and present at conferences, join professional societies, engage in online scientific communities, how often to travel, probably not once a month, but you have to go to meetings once a semester, right? And you have to get out there and present. Also, outdated advice, keep your head down, right? That's really outdated advice. I think you can't afford to keep your head down. You have to get out there and you have to forge these networks. So in terms of, this is the last slide, I think. So networking, collaboration, expanding horizons, the collaboration formula, multiplying success. So keys to selecting and thriving in scientific partnership, right? There's a few tidbits there about, how to build successful collaborations. Successful collaborations. And again, this is not like, launching your lab. This is launching your lab 2.0, right? If you want to think about like how to launch your lab and then keep it going for a long time, is really strategizing for, successful collaborations of complementary skills and resource and perspective. Reach out to people that might be field adjacent. Think big. Don't be afraid to reach out to folks, schedule regular meetings to talk about a potential grant, right? And think of collaborators that you like to work with, right? And that you like to talk about this. And a couple of podcasts that to me have given me a great insight into building something that lasts is this NPR show called How I Built This, in which they talk about successful companies, right? Like Facebook, all these amazing companies, like where they started and how they connected the dots to get to where they are. And there's also a thing called Masterclass, which I'm fascinated by, which is different people talking about how like they master whatever art, like ballet dancers, right? Artists, right? And what you find is like there's a lot of commonalities in establishing and launching your lab to launching a business or being a professional ballet dancer, right? There's some commonalities there that I just really enjoy thinking about these things. And I think if you listen to some of these podcasts, it gives you like a really great insight into, how do successful things come to be, right? Okay, so the major takeaways of today's lecture and setting up your lab, set up your physical lab, laying the foundations, right? So making sure that you plan for immediate needs of the people that you have in the lab, building your team, think about excellence, have that image of the Lakers dream team, right? Is not that you want everybody to be an amazing 3-point shooter, right? Like you have to have that complement, right? So in terms of funding and grants, get to know your funding agencies, do a lot of Google searching, but really the art of grant writing is just writing every day. In managing your research projects or steering the ship, having regular meetings with your people and having clear expectations, having that Google Doc or whatever other project thing that you do. And really, in managing your research project and steering the ship is really like managing your own time and making sure that you make time to meet with people in the lab, that you make time to write the grants, which sometimes means that you may not be 100% the best teacher ever, not all the time, and that you need to limit your service, right? And then and just don't think about the immediate, you have to remember to network and collaborate, right? And then get out there and start to build those bridges so that once you get the first grants in, you can now build the second or third grants collaboratively with people in your field and etc. Okay, so my favorite part is the questions. I hope you have enough time. I think we do, just a few minutes. I'm so sorry. But here is my lab. Here's my email. I am happy for anybody here to email me, and I'd be happy to sit with you guys and talk about anything. So do not be afraid to do that. And I will sit on Zoom. So happy to do that. So now I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Victoria. This was amazing. I mean, I just want to start telling that this is kind of scary. So this is not easy path, but I think since it's working pretty much everyone and some over the years, some people get tenured. So hope it's gonna turn okay for everyone. But this was super insightful presentation, and it includes all of the tips and tricks. So we have a couple of questions. So the first question is, how do you know what to focus on if you don't know what postdocs, PhDs will be joining, and if you are in multi-method labs? In other words, what to focus on when you are starting from scratch?
Yeah, so I think the really important thing to focus on, and I'll tell you kind of what I did, right? So obviously you did your postdoc and you published a few papers, right? And then you already say you landed the job, and obviously you landed the job already because you've already put together, a project narrative, you probably had a chalk talk, right? And you've been forced already to think about, so what I'm saying is this, the job search is a critical time to focus those ideas. And in that whole time is where I focused and I got feedback, in the job search through practices, right? And what I said is like, okay, I'm really, my research as a postdoc focused on touch, right? So touch has effects on so many aspects of our lives, right? And I thought about this strategically. I said, okay, touch affects the way we move. Touch affects the way we feel pain sometimes. Touch affects the way we socialize. What are the NIH study sections that fund this? So here's what I learned. There isn't a study section to purely study touch. So all my touch grants didn't get funded. Oh, I want to understand touch. No one cared, okay? No one cares about touch. Now, when touch turns to pain, people cared about that, right? Because there's a study section for it. When touch helps us to move, right? People cared about that because there's a study section called sensory motor integration, right? And so I think what you inevitably have to focus on is if you're doing NIH money, you have to focus on what study sections are going to, is there a standing study section that is going to, and very early on, I figured out there's 3 study sections that I can really commit and then I started writing grants towards those 3 study sections, right? And some were successful, some were not, right? Like some took several tries, right? Some landed the first time, right? But it's really a matter what you choose to write. Is is there a study section? Is there a funding mechanism to get this funded, right? And I think that then I recruited people knowing that, they were things that I did as a postdoc that I felt like I could justify that I could do in my own lab. And I recruited postdocs accordingly, or people that I knew I could teach them those specific skills, right? And so I think a lot in the beginning has to be determined about the funding agencies and what they will fund. But I learned that through the process of interviewing, right? And the process of like the job market and thinking about there's lots of grants and things that I applied as a postdoc that never got funded, and I got feedback, and through that feedback I learned, right? So I think I learned a lot through all of my failures, right?
Thanks, Vic. So we have, and I mean, I know we are almost time, but if you have 5 more minutes or so,
Of course,
we can.
you can
Okay,
stay.
perfect. Okay, the
Um,
second question is someone is asking, I think there already been 7 years since PhD defense, and is asking, it's too late to consider as an independent faculty position. And also, is there any minimum H index or number of total citation that are expected prior to applying?
I see. It says I see this as the mirror. Okay, if it's already been 7 years since PhD defense, is it too late to consider independent faculty? Is there a minimum H index and number of total citations that are expected prior to applying? Okay, so I did a 7-year postdoc, right? So that was 7 years post PhD defense, right? I did a very long postdoc. I think that I think that landing a faculty position, and it's of course a different conversation because it's okay. My talk today was like, okay, launching your lab, assuming that okay, you get a faculty position, right? But here's the thing about faculty positions, because now I'm on the other end of it, right? Like I'm on search committees and things. Faculty positions is about the right fit. But also faculty positions is about your network, right? Do have you been in that field? Have you been to meetings? Have you, talked to people? And I think my number one skill that I think I had that played well was that as I was finishing my postdoc, I was talking to everybody about my work and being like, I'm going to be in the job market. I'm going to be in the job market. These are my ideas, And then there's something about, people seeing you face to face that all of a sudden when your application comes through a job ad, that they'll pick you out that pile, right? Because like, oh, I remember that Victoria person. She had like a lot of energy and she talked to me, and that way, so I think that there isn't an H index and a number of total citations expected to prior to applying, but do they know you? And do you have, will you be a good colleague? Right? I think so often people underestimate the power of soft skills, right? Quote unquote soft skills in advancing in your career, which is something that I'm trying to advocate more in PhD trainings and postdocs trainings. Okay, it's not enough to have good papers and good grants, right? And it's not about cell science and nature because there's plenty of jobs out there, people that don't have cell science or nature. It's about, how you communicate your science, about attending meetings. How do you hold a 5-minute elevator pitch conversation, right? How do you come across when you chit chat with someone, right? All those things I think are truly important in moving the needle and something that probably doesn't get enough attention in training. Yeah, that's a good question.
Okay, we have another question. Do you want me to read or?
Yeah, go ahead and read it and then I'll find it on
Okay.
the
So the other question is how did you approach finding your personal level of hands-on involvement in research activities, for example, working in the data and analysis, etc., as a faculty member? And I have a feeling about the role transition from the person doing the science to the person managing the project and people doing the science. So I'm always curious about how people navigate this.
Uh, is it Saren? Oh, that is such a great question. And this is how it worked for me. So when I established my lab, I was in the lab doing a lot of experiments, right? But then I said to myself, what are the experiments that I can do myself that will save my postdocs and graduate students a lot of time, right? And I said, like, I could do the clutch experiment. I could do the experiment. Oh, we're answering the question. Here, I've answered it. But I didn't want to do that because I wanted my people to do that, right? I wanted my people to have that feeling of like, oh my God, I did the experiment, I got the answer. But what is it that I could do to help foster that? And we have a large mouse genetics. We have like 300 cages of mice. I managed the mouse colony for the first year and a half, right? I did all the genotyping, I did all the tagging, right? Because that was one thing that I knew that if I can take that off of people's, right, they can get to do what it is that they wanted to do, right? And so I threw myself into the mouse colony. I was like, I can do this, I can genotype. And also the cool thing about it is that I can, if you do mouse genotyping, you could do it at odd hours, right? So I can still do my grant writing, right? So I think you have to ask yourself, what is the one experiment or set of experiments or things that you can do in your lab that will foster the people get the ground going faster, right? Don't think about, oh, like doing the experiment that will answer that question, but what is like the groundwork that you can do that will allow the people in your lab. And once you do that groundwork that allows people in the lab to get to those questions, then I stepped away from the PCR genotyping. By then we had a lab manager, right, to do the PCR genotyping, and I had taught her how to do it. And then eventually we transitioned to transgenetics, so now it's a moot point. But I think in the beginning, in truly launching or setting up your lab, is like initially like, oh man, doing all that grunt work, right? That, you could put your postdoc on, but that's a shitty, I mean, like, no, let me just, but that also depends on who you recruit, because sometimes maybe you're recruiting a grad student, right? So maybe the grad student has to also, like, part of it is learning the grad work, right? And so maybe you do have to kind of come in and do that. You have to find out, like, the people that you're recruiting in your lab, like, what is like the thing that they don't like to do, and then you do it. Right? So like, like at one time I'd be like, oh, you don't like perfusions. Well, let me just come in and do the perfusions for you, right? So you have to find out the things that they don't like to do to get going. Once they get going, it's fine. You can start to step away. But I would say I didn't start to step away from the bench until like probably year 2 or year 3, really. Year 1 was all at the bench, right? But as soon as I started to recruit postdocs, but year 2 I stepped away, and by year 3 I was mostly away from the lab. Occasionally I do a few experiments. Maybe there's a finding that I need maybe to start a new project, and maybe I'll go like do a skin staining or something. But it gets harder and harder to do that, right? But that's how I did it. Yeah, that's a great question.
Okay. Another question is, how strong the preliminary data play a role in getting the grants funded?
Yeah, so on your first grants, not that much, right? Because I think that on first grants, when you're launching your own lab, there's things like ESI, there's things like New Investigator, in which the preliminary data is not as strong. But here's the trick to landing those first few grants, is understanding what preliminary data is the most believable to your study section. Right. So once I recognized a study section that I think this material could fit into, and what I'm talking about, once I realized the study section, I had an idea. And from that idea, I jot down an abstract or something of like a project. And then I put it into a nice reporter, and I was like, oh, NPI. Neuroscience of pain and itch. This is where it was, and some of the study sections are easy to find, right? Like you don't have to do that. Sometimes just based on, it's called the neuroscience of pain and itch. I mean, like, And so I went there and I looked at the history, and I found that there was a Rutgers professor that served on that study section. So I contacted that Rutgers professor and I said, hey, I'm new, I'm thinking about this grant. What do you think is the preliminary data that is going to really win? Like I have this idea for the grant. Like, what is the preliminary data that I need? And he's like, you need this experiment. Thank you. I went and I did that experiment, right? And that grant was funded, right? it was like, you're gonna need this and this. Thank you. I went and I did that. And I was like, hey, Mano, like we need this. Okay, let's do it. Right. And so I think it's really important in getting funding is to understand your audience. Right. The thing is, like, all of these funding agencies will publish their study section members, right? And you can read them, and you're likely to find someone on that study section that you know, or that someone else that you know knows, or maybe in your institution in which you can ask those questions. But in the beginning, you don't need a lot of preliminary data, but you need like one key piece of preliminary data. I'm writing a grant right now, so I have three R01s, whatever, and I'm writing another R01. And that's exactly what I did. I contacted someone that was on study session for a really long time. Like, I'm thinking about this grant. What piece of data do I need? It's like, you need this piece of data. And I just met with my whole team being like, we need this piece of data by April, right? Like, because I could have been like, oh, maybe we need this, maybe we need that, and I had totally different ideas as to what keep. And I said, Bing Hai was the person who was advising me. I was like, what piece of data? I have all of these ideas, and he was like, this one. I'm like, okay, thanks, And so I think like you have to get the feedback from the reviewers, otherwise it's like a shot in the dark, right? You're just never gonna really know, right? Yeah.
This was such a great advice. I mean, that was perfect. Okay, last question. Could you please suggest which one should I focus more on grant application or publication as a postdoc?
Yeah, unfortunately, you have to focus on both. That's the unfortunate state of the field. And trust me when I say this, guys, when I was doing my postdoc and even graduate school, I mean, this was 20 years ago now, it was different, right? You guys are, going into this new era, which is tough, right? And I feel for you guys. I feel like almost now sitting on the other end on search committees, people are looking for papers and grants, right? And so now you're being asked to not just do experiments, but also to write your grants, right? And for grant fund, I think papers will definitely, because having grants will never get you anywhere, right? So obviously papers are the most important, right? You have to have papers, and you have to have, probably more than one, right? First author paper as a postdoc. But then some funding, right? It doesn't have to be K99. It could be a fellowship, right? It could be, it could be something, right? And I know for international folks, that can mean really different things, right? And sometimes I think, there aren't as many opportunities, right? So how do you do it? Work with your PI, to try and see if you can, help PI get a grant, right? What I do now with a lot of folks in my lab is I write R01 supplements and I put them on as co-mentors, right? So there are all these different R01 supplements that one can write in which my postdocs will lead, and then they put supplements to mentor students or whatever, and they're put as co-mentors, right? So they can write on their resume, I wrote this R01 supplement, right? So anything of that could, and you have to be creative, right? In that, but unfortunately that's the state. You have to do both at the same time. And I really feel for you guys. It wasn't the case when I was, in the job market, but is increasingly so now. It's really unfortunate, but that's what it is. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all we have. Of course, I have a bunch of million other questions, but I'm gonna ask you another time in person.
Let's set up a Zoom. Let's do it.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining us and then sharing this wonderful and super informative information with us. And it was super helpful. And I hope everyone enjoyed the talk. And we will be posting on our YouTube channel. And if you want to dive into another tricks and do you want to watch one more time, we're going to publish it on our social media. Thank you so much again, Victoria. And thanks for everyone for joining us tonight.